Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I want to talk to you today about a subject that is difficult but necessary. It is about separation for elevation. You see, there are times in life when the very people we love the most become the greatest obstacles to our purpose. And what do you do when the ones you call family are the ones assigned by the enemy to keep you in bondage? Many of us are suffering not because of strangers, but because of familiar faces. People who carry our last name but do not carry our vision. People who grew up in our house but do not walk in our calling. People who share our blood but do not share our purpose. There are people in your life who do not see what God has placed inside you. They do not understand your calling, and because they do not understand it, they fight it, they question it, they diminish it, they criticize it. And if you let them, they will bury it before it ever has a chance to flourish. Some of the greatest battles you will ever face will not come from strangers, but from those closest to you. People who think they know you, but they do not know what God is doing in you. Many times when God begins to elevate a person, He calls them away from certain environments, away from certain relationships, and even away from certain family members. This is not because you no longer love them, but because their presence in your life is delaying what God wants to do through you. The enemy understands that if he can keep you tied to people who refuse to grow, who refuse to change, who refuse to align with God's purpose, he can keep you stagnant. Think about Abraham. When God called him, He told him to leave his father's house and go to a land that He would show him. God didn't tell Abraham to take his whole family with him. But Abraham brought Lot. And what happened? Strife, conflict, and delay. It was only when Abraham separated from Lot that God spoke to him again and revealed more of His promise. There are people in your life who are like Lot. They are attached to you, but they are not assigned to your destiny. And because you are still trying to bring them along, you are delaying your own breakthrough. Every time you take a step forward, they find a way to pull you 2 steps back. They remind you of who you used to be instead of encouraging you toward who you are becoming. They bring up your past mistakes to keep you from embracing your future. They constantly speak words of doubt when God has given you a vision of faith. And here is the danger. If you listen to them long enough, their voices will become louder than God's voice in your life. You will start to question what you were once sure of. You will begin to doubt what God has confirmed. You will start making decisions based on their opinions instead of God's instructions. Look at Jesus when He went to His hometown. The people who knew Him as a child could not accept Him as the Messiah. They said, "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" They refused to believe in Him because they were too familiar with Him. And what does the Bible say? He could do no mighty works there because of their unbelief. Even Jesus, the Son of God, was hindered in an environment where people did not believe in Him. If unbelief in others could stop miracles in Jesus' ministry, what do you think it is doing in your life? Some of you are struggling not because you lack faith, but because you are surrounded by the wrong people. You are trying to fly, but they keep clipping your wings. You are trying to move forward, but they are holding onto your ankles. And the hard truth is, you will never reach your full potential until you are willing to separate from those who refuse to go where God is taking you. This is not about arrogance. This is about obedience. This is about recognizing that some people are only meant to be in your life for a season. And when that season is over, trying to hold on to them will only cause unnecessary pain and frustration. There are conversations you no longer need to entertain. There are phone calls you need to stop answering. There are connections you need to sever, not out of hatred, but out of wisdom. You cannot build the future God has for you while constantly being pulled back into the past. You cannot walk in your destiny while being tied to people who refuse to let go of the old you. God is calling you to something greater, but if you are not willing to make the necessary separations, you will stay in cycles of frustration. You will keep fighting battles that are not yours to fight. You will keep delaying your breakthrough because you are dragging people along who were never meant to go with you. Do not let the fear of losing people keep you from walking in your purpose. Some people will only value you when they no longer have access to you. Some people will only understand your worth when they see you from a distance. And sometimes the greatest act of love is to let go. There are people in your life who know that the best way to control you is not through force, but through guilt. They remind you of everything they have done for you, every favor they have given, every sacrifice they have made, not because they genuinely care about you, but because they want to use it as leverage. They make you feel like you owe them something, as if your life belongs to them, as if your choices must align with their desires rather than with God's plan for you. This kind of manipulation is dangerous because it operates under the disguise of love. It makes you believe that saying no is an act of betrayal, that choosing yourself is selfish, that setting boundaries means you are ungrateful. And because they are family, you feel a deeper sense of obligation. You convince yourself that you must always be available, that you must always say yes, that you must always put their needs above your own. But what happens when their needs are in direct opposition to God's calling on your life? What happens when their expectations contradict God's instructions? Some of the most difficult chains to break are not physical but emotional. When people have conditioned you to feel responsible for their happiness, they make you feel guilty whenever you make a decision that prioritizes your own well-being. They twist scripture saying, honor your father and mother, but they leave out fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. They demand respect, but they do not give respect. They expect forgiveness, but they refuse to change. Guilt is a powerful weapon because it does not attack from the outside, it attacks from within. You start second-guessing yourself. You start wondering if you are being too harsh, too distant, too uncaring. They remind you of how they raised you, how they helped you, how they were there for you when no one else was. And while gratitude is important, gratitude should never be a prison. Just because someone helped you in the past does not mean they have the right to control your future. Jesus himself had to deal with this. When his mother and brothers came looking for him while he was preaching, the people said, your family is outside waiting for you. But Jesus responded, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? Those who do the will of my Father in heaven. He was not disrespecting his family, he was setting a boundary. He was making it clear that purpose comes before obligation, that doing God's will takes priority over fulfilling human expectations. Many people live their entire lives under the weight of guilt. They stay in toxic relationships because they don't want to be labeled as selfish. They allow themselves to be drained emotionally, financially, and spiritually because they feel they have no choice. But God did not call you to live in bondage. God did not design relationships to be a one-sided sacrifice where only one person benefits while the other suffers. Love is mutual, respect is mutual, and sacrifice should never be demanded. It should be given freely. There are people who only reach out when they need something. They only remember you when they are in trouble. And the moment you say no, they call you ungrateful. They say you have changed. They tell others that you have abandoned them. But the truth is you have not abandoned them. You have simply stopped allowing them to take advantage of you. And that is something they cannot handle. Some people are addicted to being rescued. They do not want solutions, they want dependency. They do not want advice, they want control. And if they cannot control you directly, they will try to do it through guilt. They will use phrases like, after all I've done for you, if you really loved me, you would, or family is supposed to stick together. But true love does not manipulate. True love does not use emotional blackmail. True love releases, it does not restrain. You cannot allow guilt to keep you tied to people who refuse to take responsibility for their own lives. You cannot allow obligation to keep you in relationships that drain your spirit and distract you from your purpose. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no. Sometimes the best way to honor God is to remove yourself from environments where you are constantly being used and manipulated. There are people who will never change as long as they know they can always guilt trip you into doing what they want. But the moment you stop responding to manipulation, the moment you stop allowing them to control you through guilt, they will be forced to confront their own actions. They will be forced to take responsibility for their choices. And whether they change or not is no longer your burden to carry. God does not call you to be a slave to anyone's expectations. He calls you to walk in truth, in freedom, and in purpose. And if that means letting go of relationships that operate through guilt and manipulation, then that is what must be done. Because no relationship, no matter how familiar, is worth losing yourself over. There are people in your life who refuse to change, no matter how much truth they hear, no matter how many opportunities they are given, and no matter how much grace they receive. They are stuck in cycles of negativity, bad decisions, and destructive behaviors, yet they expect you to constantly accommodate their dysfunction. They do not want to grow, but they want you to stay close. They do not want to improve, but they want you to keep tolerating their toxicity. And over time, their refusal to change begins to affect your peace, your mindset, and even your spiritual well-being. One of the most dangerous things you can do is surround yourself with people who have no desire to evolve. When you are connected to someone who refuses to change, you will find yourself constantly trying to fix them, trying to help them, and trying to carry burdens that were never meant to be yours. You pour into them, but they never resist it. You offer wisdom, but they resist what God is trying to do in their lives. And the more you invest in them, the more drained you become. Peace is one of the greatest gifts God gives, but it is also one of the most fragile things to protect. It does not take much to lose it. A single toxic relationship, a single unhealthy attachment, or a single negative influence can poison the atmosphere of your life. And when you allow people who refuse to change to remain in your inner circle, their dysfunction begins to affect you. Their drama becomes your drama. Their crisis becomes your crisis. Their battles become your battles. And before you know it, you are spending more time managing their problems than walking in your purpose. Look at the example of Saul and David. Saul was a man who had the opportunity to change, but he chose not to. God gave him multiple chances to obey, to grow, to humble himself, but he resisted, and instead of taking accountability, he became jealous, bitter, and destructive. David did nothing to harm Saul, yet because Saul refused to deal with his own issues, he became a source of torment in David's life. How many people in your life are like Saul? How many people are dealing with their own internal battles, but taking them out on you? How many people are fighting against you, not because of anything you did, but because of their own refusal to confront what is wrong inside them? Some people are comfortable in their dysfunction. They do not want healing, they want attention. They do not want wisdom, they want sympathy. They do not want to grow, they want to pull others down to their level so they do not have to feel convicted about staying the same. And when you continue to allow these kinds of people into your space, your peace becomes contaminated. When God is trying to elevate you, one of the first things He will do is expose the people in your life who are not meant to go with you. He will reveal their true character, their hidden motives, and the impact they are having on your mental and spiritual health. Sometimes, the reason you feel drained all the time is not because of your own struggles, but because of the weight of carrying people who refuse to take responsibility for their own lives. You cannot force anyone to change. You cannot make them see what they do not want to see. You cannot make them value what they do not appreciate. And the longer you hold on, hoping they will transform, the more you put yourself in a position to suffer unnecessary pain. Some people are simply unwilling to grow. And the only way to protect your peace is to create distance. There are people who have been given multiple chances, yet they continue in the same patterns. They continue making the same excuses. They continue bringing the same chaos into your life. And if you are not careful, their refusal to change will become your greatest distraction. You will spend years trying to fix what only God can fix. You will waste energy trying to help someone who does not even want to help themselves. And in the end, you will realize that while you were focused on them, you were neglecting your own purpose. Some people will only wake up when they no longer have access to you. Some people will only take accountability when they no longer have you to rely on. And some people will never change, not because they cannot, but because they do not want to. And the longer you stay connected to them, the more they will rob you of your joy, your focus, and your peace. God is not calling you to carry people who refuse to walk. He is not calling you to sacrifice your well-being for someone who is committed to staying the same. And if their presence in your life is constantly draining, distracting, or disturbing your peace, then it may be time to step away, not out of hatred, but out of wisdom, not out of pride, but out of obedience. Because nothing is worth sacrificing the peace that God has given you. Your destiny is far too valuable to be compromised by the comfort of what is familiar. Many people never step into their full potential, not because they lack talent, not because they lack opportunity, but because they are afraid to leave behind the people, places, and patterns they have always known. Familiarity feels safe, but safety is not the same as destiny. What is comfortable is not always what is purposeful, and if you are not careful, you will allow familiarity to hold you hostage in a place where you were never meant to stay. One of the greatest enemies of growth is attachment to the past. People cling to environments that no longer serve them, relationships that no longer align with their calling, and mindsets that no longer reflect where God is trying to take them. But destiny requires movement. It requires transition. It requires the willingness to step away from what is known in order to embrace what is possible. Some people miss their calling not because they didn't hear God's voice, but because they were too attached to the voices around them. They were more committed to fitting in than to standing out. They were more concerned with keeping people happy than with fulfilling their assignment. When God called Abraham, he told him to leave his father's house, his country, and his relatives to go to a land that he would show him. God did not give him all the details, but he required separation before revelation. There are things that God will not show you until you have the courage to walk away from what is familiar. Some blessings are on the other side of obedience, and obedience often requires letting go. Abraham could not step into his promised land while staying in the comfort of his old environment. Likewise, you cannot fully step into your purpose while staying connected to things and people who keep you tied to the past. Familiarity creates a sense of obligation. People expect you to stay the same because it makes them comfortable. The moment you start changing, growing, and pursuing purpose, you become a threat to those who refuse to change. Some will try to discourage you, not because you are wrong, but because your growth reminds them of their own stagnation. They will question your decisions, they will criticize your new direction, and they will try to pull you back into the version of yourself they are comfortable with. But you cannot allow their expectations to define your journey. Jesus himself faced this when he returned to his hometown. The people who had known him as a child could not accept him as the Son of God. They said, "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" Their familiarity with his past blinded them to his purpose, and because of their unbelief, he could do no mighty works there. The presence of familiarity limited the power of God. If Jesus had remained in that environment, he would have been surrounded by doubt instead of faith, by small-minded thinking instead of vision, by people who only saw him through the lens of his past rather than the reality of his calling. Some of the greatest opposition you will face will come from those closest to you, not because they hate you, but because they do not understand where God is taking you. And if you allow their lack of vision to dictate your decisions, you will end up shrinking yourself to fit into a space you have outgrown. Growth requires discomfort. It requires difficult choices. It requires understanding that not everyone who started with you is meant to finish with you. God is meant to finish with you only while he started with you. Familiarity often disguises itself as loyalty. People will tell you that you have changed, that you are forgetting where you came from, that you are abandoning the people who were there for you. But there is a difference between remembering where you came from and being trapped by it. You can be grateful for your past without allowing it to limit your future. You can honor relationships without allowing them to control you. Destiny demands that you prioritize where you are going over where you have been. God did not create you to stay in the same place, doing the same things with the same people for the rest of your life. He created you to grow, to expand, and to walk in the fullness of your calling. But the enemy will use familiarity to keep you stuck. He will use guilt to keep you tied to people who do not support your vision. He will use fear to keep you from stepping out into the unknown. He will use comfort to keep you from pursuing greatness. Some people are more afraid of losing relationships than they are of losing their destiny. They stay in environments that drain them, in friendships that no longer serve them, in conversations that weaken their faith, all because they fear the pain of separation. But separation is often the price of elevation. You cannot take everyone with you where God is leading you. Some people were only meant to be part of your past, not your future. And if you refuse to let go, you will delay your own progress. Your destiny is too important to be held hostage by the fear of disappointing others. It is too valuable to be limited by the expectations of those who do not see what God has placed inside you. It is too significant to be sacrificed for the sake of fitting in. You were not created to remain the same. You were not called to stay in places that no longer align with your growth. You were designed to walk boldly into the future God has prepared for you, even if it means walking away from the familiar.